She threw a $10 bill at a man who just saved her car from complete destruction, and she did it in front of his 8-year-old son. Not quietly, not with hesitation. She slapped it on that counter like she was tipping a parking attendant, looked that little boy dead in the eyes, and told him his father's hands weren't worth professional pay. 5 days later, she came crawling back. And what happened next will make you question everything you think you know about talent, pride, and what a man is truly worth. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. Subscribe if you're new. Let's get into it. The black SUV came through the rain like it owned the road. Not driving, moving through. The kind of vehicle that parts traffic and expects the world to rearrange itself in courtesy. It rolled off the main street and pulled directly in front of Andre Williams' garage, with the confidence of something that had never, in its entire mechanical life, been kept waiting. Andre didn't look up right away. He was underneath a 2009 Chevy Silverado, his hands deep inside the undercarriage, chasing a vibration nobody else had been able to find. The owner had taken that truck to 3 other shops, paid diagnostic fees twice, got told it was the transmission, then told it was the differential, then told to just live with it. He'd brought it to Andre as a last resort, the way people call a doctor they don't entirely trust because every other doctor has already failed them. Andre had found the problem in 11 minutes, a hairline fracture in the rear drive shaft mount, invisible to a standard lift inspection. You had to feel for it. You had to know where heat stress accumulated over time, on that specific model, on that specific year, with that specific combination of road and load. It wasn't something you learned from a diagnostic computer. It was something you learned from 15 years of putting your hands where the machines couldn't reach. He was finishing the last torque check when he heard the car door. The rain had already been falling for 2 hours, steady and cold, the kind of October rain in this part of the country that doesn't announce itself, it just arrives and settles in like it belongs there. The street outside smelled like wet asphalt and exhaust. Inside the garage, it smelled like grease and WD-40 and the faint sweetness of the plug-in air freshener his son Marcus had picked out at the dollar store 3 weeks ago. Strawberry. Marcus had been very serious about that choice. Andre slid out from under the Silverado and stood up. The woman walking through his garage door was not dressed for rain. She had a charcoal blazer over a silk blouse, slacks with a crease sharp enough to cut, and heels that had no business being anywhere near a wet parking lot. She was young, younger than he expected, with the kind of face that had learned early how to project authority before a word was spoken. Her hair was pulled back, her jaw was set. She was carrying a phone in one hand and irritation in the other, and she looked at the inside of Andre's garage the way people look at a restaurant they already regret choosing. She looked at the tools hanging on the pegboard. She looked at the old floor jack and the shop light strung from the ceiling on an extension cord. She looked at the coffee maker on the folding table in the corner, the one with cracked Marcus had fixed with a strip of duct tape and declared basically good as new, Dad. Then she looked at Andre. Is the owner here? Andre pulled a shop rag from his back pocket and wiped his hands. He looked at her steadily. You're looking at him. She blinked. Once. The way people blink when reality delivers something mildly inconvenient. I need my vehicle looked at. It stopped responding. The dash is throwing codes I've never seen, and it won't complete a restart cycle. What's the make? It's a Sterling Apex S9. Andre paused for just a fraction of a second. The Sterling Apex S9 was not a vehicle you saw in this neighborhood. It was not a vehicle you saw in most neighborhoods. It was a limited production luxury performance vehicle. The company that made it built fewer than 200 per year, and each one started above $320,000 before options. It was the kind of car that had its own dedicated service center with technicians who'd been flown to Germany for training. When did the code start? About 40 minutes ago. I was driving and it started stuttering. Then the dash lit up and it locked the engine. Did it overheat? No, the temperature was fine. Any unusual sounds before the codes? Anything high-pitched, anything irregular in the idle? She hesitated. There was something, about 3 days ago. A kind of I don't know. How often? I thought it was nothing. The service team checked it last week. Andre nodded slowly and moved toward the door. He stepped outside into the rain without hesitating and walked around the vehicle in a full circle before he opened the hood. He stood over the engine for a long moment, not touching anything, just looking. Then he reached in and pressed 2 fingers against a specific component near the rear left of the engine bay. He felt it immediately. He kept his expression even. "Pull it into the bay." She looked at the open garage entrance. "In there? Unless you want me to work on it in the rain." She got in the vehicle and pulled it forward. Andre guided her with 2 hands until the front wheels crossed the threshold. Then he pointed her to the driver's corner, a metal folding chair next to the tool bench, and turned to the engine. What he'd felt under his fingertips during that 30-second outdoor check was a faint heat signature around the secondary relay block that should not have been there. The relay block on an S9 was a sealed unit, theoretically maintenance-free, designed to be replaced as a module rather than repaired. Every certified Sterling technician would have run a diagnostic scan, gotten a module error code, and ordered a replacement unit, a part that cost $4,000 and took 10 days to arrive. Andre had serviced exactly one S9 in his career, 4 years ago, when a collector had limped in from the highway with what turned out to be a nearly identical issue. That experience had taught him something the Sterling service manual didn't mention. Secondary relay block on early S9 models had a design flaw in the internal thermal coupling. Under repeated high-performance driving in cold weather, exactly the conditions the coupling would develop microscopic separation. Not enough to trigger a hard fault immediately, just enough to create intermittent resistance, just enough to cause exactly what this woman had described. The ticking she'd heard 3 days ago was the coupling starting to separate. The codes she was seeing today were the relay block finally failing. If the vehicle had been driven another 50 miles, the separated coupling would have arsed. One arc inside a sealed relay block in an engine bay that had been running hot could cascade into a fire that would travel through the vehicle's entire electrical harness in less than 90 seconds. The S9's electrical harness ran beneath the floorboards, through the door panels, up through the dashboard, and was not accessible without full disassembly. The vehicle would have been a total loss. Andre didn't say any of this yet. He kept working. He heard the small footsteps before he heard the voice. Marcus came in from the back room where he'd been doing homework at the little table had set up for him, a folding card table with a proper desk lamp and a cup full of sharpened pencils. Because Marcus took his homework seriously, and Andre took Marcus seriously. He was 8 years old and roughly the size of a determined 10-year-old, with his mother's eyes and the same steady patience she had carried. "Dad, I finished the math worksheet." "Good man, leave it on the table, I'll check it in a bit." Marcus came and stood at the edge of the work bay, the way he always did, watching with the focused curiosity of a child who had grown up understanding that engines were serious things deserving serious attention. The woman who had been scrolling her phone with the impatience of someone accustomed to having problems resolved immediately. By other people glanced up at Marcus. She looked at him for a moment without speaking. Then she looked back at her phone. Andre worked for 22 minutes. He removed the relay block carefully, because the thermal coupling required a specific extraction sequence, or you risked damaging the surrounding components, and confirmed the separation under his bench magnifier. He sourced a compatible coupling from his parts inventory, a universal thermal component he'd ordered on principle after the first S9 he'd worked on, because he believed in having what you needed before you needed it. He cleaned both contact surfaces, applied thermal bonding compound, recoupled the assembly, reseated the block, cleared the error codes, and ran a full restart cycle. The engine came to life, clean, even, no tick. He ran it for 4 minutes and monitored the relay block temperature. The heat distribution was uniform. The coupling was holding. He wiped his hands and walked to the small desks where he kept his invoices. He wrote it up carefully, the way he always did parts labor, diagnostic. He believed in transparency. He believed a customer had the right to know exactly what they were paying for and why. He set the invoice on the counter, $650. The woman looked at it. She looked at it for a long moment, the way people look at a bill they've already decided they're going to challenge, working themselves up to the argument before they've even read the numbers. $650. Yes, you touched my car for what, 25 minutes? 22. And you're charging $650. Andre kept his voice level, completely level. The way a man keeps his voice level when he has been in this exact conversation before and has decided, long ago, that he will not perform frustration for an audience. You're not paying for the time. You're paying for knowing what to look for. That's a very convenient thing to say. Your relay block had a failed thermal coupling. If you'd driven another 50 miles, that coupling would have arsed inside a sealed unit in a hot engine bay. You know what happens after that? She said nothing. Your electrical harness runs under your floorboards, through your door panels, into your dashboard. One arc in that relay block, and your car would have been on fire before you had time to pull over. He paused. I also saved you a $4,000 module replacement, a 10-day wait for parts, and a tow to the nearest Sterling Service Center, which is 47 miles from here. She looked at him. Something passed across her face, not quite acknowledgement, not quite gratitude, something that was struggling to become one of those things but hadn't gotten there yet, blocked by something harder and older and more reflexive. She reached into her bag, she pulled out her wallet, and she took out a $10 bill. She placed it on the counter. She didn't slide it. She didn't hand it. She placed it flat. Deliberate, final. The way you place something you've decided is adequate, and don't intend to discuss further. That's what your work is worth. Andre didn't move. The garage was completely quiet except for the rain on the roof and the engine of her car. Still running, still even, still holding every repair he had just completed. Then she looked at Marcus, 8 years old, standing at the edge of the bay with his math worksheet in his hand, and his father's eyes and his mother's patience, watching the way children watch things they don't fully understand, but know, instinctively, are important. She looked at Marcus, and she said, maybe teach your son that people who work with their hands shouldn't charge like professionals. She picked up her keys from the counter. She walked out. She got in the car. She drove away into the rain. Andre stood at the counter. He did not move for a long time. He could feel Marcus behind him. He could feel the question, before it came the weight of it, gathering in the silence of the garage, in the space between a child's understanding of the world and the reality that had just walked through the door and back out again. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice was quiet, not upset, not angry, just careful. The way children are careful when they're asking a question they're not sure they want the answer to. Dad, yeah bud, is your work really only worth $10? Andre turned around. He looked at his son, at those steady eyes, at the math worksheet still held in both hands, at the small crease between his brows that appeared whenever Marcus was trying to work something out. Andre walked to the counter. He picked up the $10 bill. He walked to the metal filing cabinet in the corner, the one with the dent, in the second drawer from when the Silverado's wheel had rolled into it 3 years ago. He opened the top drawer. He placed the $10 bill inside, flat alone, on top of nothing. He closed the drawer. Then he turned back to Marcus and crouched down to eye level. Hand me that worksheet. Marcus handed it over. Andre looked at it. Every problem completed. Every answer written in Marcus's careful, deliberate print. The handwriting of a child who understood that neatness was a form of respect for the work. You got number 7 wrong. Marcus immediately looked alarmed. Did? You carried the 2 when you didn't need to. Go back and check it. Marcus took the worksheet and hurried back to his card table, already recalculating, already focused, already moving forward. Andre stood in the empty garage and listened to the rain. The engine on the Silverado had long since been turned off. The garage was still. The strawberry air freshener swayed slightly from the ceiling fan's pull. The $10 bill sat in the drawer. He thought about the coupling he'd just repaired, about the heat that had been building invisibly inside that sealed unit, day after day, mile after mile, until the separation was just 1 more degree away from becoming a fire. He thought about the woman who hadn't known how close she'd come. He thought about the way she'd looked at him when she walked in. He thought about the way she'd looked at Marcus when she walked out. Andre pulled his stool to the workbench and opened the manual for the Silverado. He still had to document the repair properly for the owner's records. He still had invoices to reconcile before the week closed. He still had a son who needed dinner and a math problem corrected and a story read before bed. He picked up his pen. He went back to work, because that was what Andre Williams had always done. Not because anyone was watching, Not because anyone was clapping. Not because the world had decided yet what his work was worth. But because there was a boy in the back room with his mother's eyes counting on him to show what a man looks like when the world decides to underestimate him. And Andre had decided, a long time ago, that what a man looks like in that moment is this. He picks up his pen. He goes back to work. He does not ask the world's permission to be valuable. He simply is. The next morning came the way mornings always came in Andre's world, without ceremony and without apology. The alarm went off at 5:15. Andre was already awake. He had been awake since 4, lying in the dark with his eyes open, listening to the particular quiet half of a small apartment in the hours before the neighborhood remembered itself. The radiator ticked. A car passed on the street below. Somewhere down the hall, a door opened and closed. The ordinary sounds of people living ordinary lives inside a building that had seen better decades but was still standing, which Andre figured counted for something. He got up without hitting snooze. He never hit snooze. Hitting snooze was a luxury of people who didn't have a child, who needed breakfast before 7:15 and a school drop-off that required leaving the apartment no later than 7:40 because the crossing guard on Birch Street only held traffic until 7:52. And Marcus was the kind of 8-year-old who believed that being late was a character flaw, which meant that if they missed the crossing guard, Marcus would spend the entire school day carrying a low-grade anxiety about punctuality that would make him difficult to read to at bedtime. Andre had learned all of this empirically. He had learned it the way he learned everything, by paying attention. He went to the kitchen first. He put on the coffee, measured out the oats, sliced the banana exactly the way Marcus liked it, not too thin. Not in rounds, but in diagonal cuts, because Marcus had decided at age 6 that diagonal banana slices tasted different from round ones, and Andre had never been able to definitively disprove this and set the bowl on the table with the blue plastic placemat that had cartoon cars on it, which Marcus claimed he was too old for, but had never once asked to replace. While the oats cooked, Andre stood at the kitchen window with his coffee and looked at the street below. The rain from the night before had stopped. The pavement was still dark and wet, reflecting the early orange of the streetlights in long broken columns that shivered every time a car moved through them. The neighborhood was still mostly asleep. The bodega on the corner had its lights on. The laundromat was dark. The bus shelter across the street had one person in it, an older man in a work jacket, standing very still, waiting with the patience of someone who had been waiting for buses his entire adult life and had made his peace with it. Andre drank his coffee and thought about the $10 bill in his filing cabinet. He thought about it the way you think about a splinter you've already removed. It was gone. The wound was minor. It would be fine. But the place where it had been was still tender. And the tenderness had a specific location that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with what had been said in front of Marcus. People who work with their hands shouldn't charge like professionals. He turned away from the window and checked the oats. He was not a man who spent long periods marinating in bitterness. He had known men who did that, men from his neighborhood, from his father's generation, men who had been handed genuine and serious injustices, and who had let those injustices become the organizing principle of everything they did afterward, so that every decision and every relationship and every morning got filtered through the lens of what had been taken from them. He understood those men. He had no contempt for them. What had been done to them was real, and the weight of it was real, and he was not going to stand in judgment of how a man carried a weight he hadn't chosen. But Andre had also watched what that carried weight did to a person over time. He had watched it bend some men and harden others, and in every case it had taken something, some quality of forward motion, some capacity for openness, and slowly, over years, converted it into something defended and closed. He wasn't willing to let that happen to himself. More importantly, he wasn't willing to let Marcus watch it happen. Because Marcus was watching everything. Marcus had always been watching everything. Since he was 18 months old, and watching Andre change a tire in the parking lot of their old apartment complex, Marcus had watched his father with the same focused, cataloging attention that he brought to his math worksheets and his homework and the books he read after dinner. And Andre had known for years with a certainty that lived somewhere below thought, in the place where you know the things that matter most, that Marcus was not just watching what Andre did. He was watching who Andre was. He was filing it away, building a model of manhood from the raw material of his father's daily behavior, and that model was going to go with Marcus for the rest of his life, which meant every morning mattered, every decision mattered, every moment when the world did something unfair, and Andre chose how to respond to it, that mattered most of all. So Andre had placed the $10 bill in the drawer, not to forget it, not to pretend it hadn't happened, but to put it in the right place, to say, with the physical act of containing it, that this thing has a location, and that location is there, and not here where I am standing, not here where I am making breakfast and going to work and raising my son. Marcus came out of his bedroom at 6:45, which was exactly when he always came out, dressed already, backpack on, shoes tied. He sat down at the table and looked at the oats and the banana, and picked up his spoon. You slice them diagonal. I always slice them diagonal. I know. He took a bite. He chewed thoughtfully. Dad. That lady yesterday. Andre poured himself more coffee and sat down across from Marcus. He did not rush to answer. He did not change his expression. He just looked at his son and waited. Because Marcus always got to the point in his own time, and interrupting him only made the process longer. She was mean to you. She was, and you didn't say anything. I said plenty. You didn't yell. No, Marcus considered this. He ate another spoonful of oats. Why not? Because yelling would have changed the sound of what happened, but not the fact of it. She would have left feeling like she'd provoked me. That would have been a win for her, but she didn't pay you. No, she didn't, and she said that thing about your hands. She did. Marcus put down his spoon. He looked at Andre with an expression that was trying very hard to be adult, to process this, the way he understood adults supposed to process unfair things, with measured evaluation rather than raw feeling. But underneath the effort, the feeling was visible. A child's clean, uncomplicated outrage at watching his father be diminished. Andre leaned forward with his elbows on the table. You want to know something about what happened yesterday? Yeah. That woman's car would have caught fire. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow, but within the next few days. Driving the way she drives. That coupling would have failed completely, and the arc would have started the harness. She would have been driving on the highway, probably, or on an exit ramp, and the dash would have lit up about 4 seconds before the smoke, and she might have gotten out fine, or she might not have. Marcus stared at him. I fixed it for $650, which was fair. Actually, it was low, because a Sterling service center would have charged her 4 times that and taken 10 days. She left without paying it, and she said what she said. And now here's what I want you to hear, bud. She is going to drive that car today, and it is going to run perfectly, because I fixed it. Not because she deserved it, not because she paid me, because the work deserved to be done right. Marcus was quiet for a moment. That doesn't seem fair. It's not. So why does it matter that you did it right if she didn't even appreciate it? Andre sat back. He looked at his son for a long moment. Because I'm not doing it for her appreciation. I'm doing it for mine. You understand the difference? Marcus thought about it. Really thought about it. Andre could see him working it over, the crease and appearing, which meant the idea was being filed into the category of things that require more processing time. I think so, Marcus said, which was Marcus's careful, honest way of saying, I'm not sure, but I don't want to lie to you. Good enough. Eat your breakfast. They left at 7:38. They made the crossing guard by 4 minutes. Marcus walked into Skull without looking back, the way he always did, not because he wasn't loved, but because he was confident enough in being loved that he didn't need to confirm it at every departure. That confidence was the thing Andre was most proud of in his son, and the thing that cost Andre the most to sustain, and he would not have traded either of those facts for anything. Andre walked back to the garage alone. The morning was cold and clear after the rain, the sky that particular hard blue that appears in October in the Midwest when the clouds have cleared and the air has no humidity left in it, and everything is very bright and very sharp-edged. Andre walked with his hands in his jacket pockets and his head slightly down, not in defeat but in thought, the posture of a man working through something internal while his feet handle the external automatically. He was thinking about the relay block. He was thinking about what she'd said when she walked in the dashes throwing codes I've never seen, and about the quality of her panic versus the quality of her contempt. How both of them had been genuine, how both of them had revealed something true about her. The panic was real. The contempt was also real. And the order in which she'd expressed them: contempt first, as a default, and then panic when the default turned out to be insufficient, that told him something. It told him she was a person who had learned that contempt was a useful first tool, that it put people in their place before they could put you in yours. That in her world, wherever that world was, establishing hierarchy before establishing connection was how you protected yourself. He had met people like that before. Not often, but enough. Usually, they were people who had achieved something real and were terrified. At some level, they would never verbally acknowledge that the achievement was either not enough or not permanent or not as deserved as they needed it to be. He didn't excuse what she'd done. He was clear-eyed about what she'd done. But he was also, in the particular way he had learned to be through loss and work, and 8 years of raising a boy alone, capable of holding the fact of her cruelty and a partial understanding of its origin at the same time, without needing those two things to cancel each other out. He unlocked the garage. He had 2 vehicles scheduled for the morning: a 2014 Ford F-150 belonging to a regular customer named Dale, who ran a small landscaping business and needed his crew truck back by noon, and a 2018 Honda Accord belonging to a woman named Mrs. Peterson, who was 73 years old and had been bringing her cars to this garage since before Andre had owned it. Since before his mentor Raymond had owned it. Actually, Mrs. Peterson had been a customer of the previous owner, a man named Curtis, who had opened the shop in 1987 and sold it to Raymond in 2003. She had outlasted 3 owners of this garage and fully intended, she had told Andre once with complete seriousness, to outlast a 4th. Andre liked Mrs. Peterson. She brought him cookies at Christmas and asked genuine questions about Marcus, and occasionally commented on the condition of his tools with the evaluative confidence of a woman who had been watching men work in garages for 50 years. He got to work. There was a specific quality to Andre's concentration when he was working that people who had watched him described as almost meditative. He wasn't performing calm. He wasn't suppressing distraction. He was genuinely somewhere else in the language of the machine, in the diagnostic conversation between his hands and the mechanical systems he was working with. His former mentor Raymond had called it listening to the metal, which had sounded almost mystical when Andre first heard it at 17, and had come to seem more literally accurate with every passing year. He heard things, not auditory hallucinations. He was entirely clear-eyed about what was metaphor and what was literal. But the way that an experienced musician hears a wrong note in a chord before they can articulate what's wrong with it, Andre's hands and ears had developed a sensitivity to mechanical function that operated below the level of conscious analysis. He would feel something, follow the feeling, find the problem, and only afterward construct the diagnostic explanation for what he'd already found. It had made him very good at his job. It had also made him aware, since the age of about 22, that his skill was genuinely unusual. Not performing in front of an audience unusual, not talking about it unusual. He was deeply uncomfortable with that kind of exhibition. But privately, honestly, he knew that what he could do with an engine was not what everyone could do. And that fact had always given him something solid to stand on when the world tried to make him feel less than what he was. By 9:30, he had finished the preliminary diagnostic on the F-150 and identified a seized brake caliper on the rear passenger side that Dale hadn't even mentioned because he hadn't known it was there. He called Dale. The caliper's seized on the rear right. Lord, is that why she's been pulling? That's exactly why. I'm going to fix the original issue and the caliper both. You'll have it back by 11:30. Andre, you are a genuine lifesaver. Seriously. I'll have the invoice ready when you pick up. He hung up and went back to work. At 10:50, while he was under the F-150 installing the replacement caliper, he heard someone come into the garage. He assumed it was Dale early, which Dale sometimes was. He kept working. Mr. Williams. Not Dale. A male voice, unfamiliar, with the particular measured cadence of someone who had rehearsed what they were about to say. Andre slid out from under the truck. Standing just inside the garage entrance was a man in his mid-30s, in a dark coat and dress shoes that were making a polite argument against being present in a mechanic's garage. He was holding a phone and looking at Andre with an expression that was professionally neutral in the way that only people with professional reasons to control their expressions ever manage. "Are you Andre Williams?" "Depends on what you're selling." "I'm not selling anything." He pulled a business card from his inside pocket and held it out. "My name is Daniel Cho. I'm the Director of Fleet Operations for Sterling Automotive North America." Andre stood up slowly. He looked at the card without taking it. "Sterling." "Yes, sir. The same Sterling's CEO was in my garage yesterday afternoon." A brief pause. "Miss Sterling mentioned she'd had an issue with her vehicle." "Miss Sterling," Andre repeated carefully. "Victoria Sterling." "Yes." Daniel Cho lowered the card and put it back in his pocket with the smooth motion of a man recalibrating quickly. "I'm not here about yesterday. I'm here because I pulled the diagnostic readout from her vehicle's onboard system this morning. The S9 has a continuous data log, every sensor reading, every temperature, every system parameter, stored and uploaded automatically to our fleet management system every 24 hours. Andre waited. The coupling failure on the secondary relay block, the thermal separation, it's all in the log. Daniel Cho looked at him with an expression that was no longer professionally neutral. It was something more direct than that. "Mr. Williams, that failure mode isn't documented in any service manual we publish. Our certified technicians don't know to look for it. We have 17 other S9 vehicles currently in service across North America, and based on what the log shows about the failure pattern on Ms. Sterling's vehicle, there's a meaningful probability that at least 3 or 4 of those vehicles have the same developing issue." Andre was quiet for a moment. "You want me to explain what I found? I want to understand how you identified it. Specifically, what indicators you were working from, what your diagnostic process was, whether it's reproducible." "It's reproducible." "How did you know to check the relay block?" "The ticking she mentioned, 3 days before the fault codes appeared. On that model, on the S9 specifically, intermittent ticking in that part of the engine bay under cold weather operation points to one of two things: a minor timing irregularity or early thermal coupling separation in the relay block. The timing irregularity would have shown up in a standard scan," she said. "The service team scanned it last week and found nothing. So the timing was fine, which meant the coupling." Daniel Cho stared at him. "Our engineering team didn't make that connection. Your engineering team was probably running the standard diagnostic protocol. The standard protocol doesn't prompt you to check the relay block unless you're getting a hard module fault. By the time you're getting the hard fault, the coupling's already failed. The ticking is the leading indicator, and nobody documented it, because the first time it happened on a customer vehicle, the customer probably described it as a minor noise. The technician probably told them to monitor it. And then the vehicle came in 3 days later throwing codes, and they replaced the module and never connected the two events." Daniel Cho took a slow breath. "Mr. Williams, would you be willing to come in and speak with our engineering team?" "About what?" "About this specific failure mode. About how to identify it at the pre-fault stage. About potentially, and I want to be clear that this would require a formal conversation with Ms. Sterling and our technical leadership. This is not an offer I'm authorized to extend, but about potentially serving in some kind of consulting capacity on our S9 fleet inspection protocol." Andre looked at him for a long, steady moment. "I have a truck I need to finish, and a customer picking up in 40 minutes. Of course, I don't need an answer now. Daniel Cho paused, and for the first time, his professional composure cracked, just slightly, into something more honest. "I read the data log this morning, Mr. Williams. That coupling was 8 to 12 days from a catastrophic arc failure. Miss Sterling drives that vehicle every day. She drives it on I-94 at 80 miles an hour. I have 2 daughters." He stopped. "I just wanted to say that in person, before I said anything else." Andre looked at him. "Leave your card." Daniel Cho set the business card on the edge of the tool bench. He nodded once, turned, and walked back out. Andre stood in the empty garage for a moment. Then he crouched down, slid back under the F-150, picked up his wrench, and finished installing the caliper. Dale arrived at 11:25, 5 minutes early. He looked at the invoice, looked at Andre, and said the same thing he always said. How do you always find the thing nobody told you to look for? And Andre said the same thing he always said, because I'm not only looking for what you told me to look for. Dale laughed, wrote the check, and left. Mrs. Peterson arrived at noon exactly, which was always when she arrived, because Mrs. Peterson had strong feelings about punctuality that were at least equal to Marcus's. You look tired, Mrs. Peterson said. I'm fine. You look like something's on your mind. Mrs. Peterson, I always have something on my mind. This is different. This is the something happened yesterday look. She settled herself into the metal folding chair, the customer chair, as she had always called it, with a dryness that suggested she was aware it was not exactly a waiting room, and folded her hands in her lap. You might as well tell me. I'll be here for at least 40 minutes. Andre kept working on her accord, checking the brake pads she'd brought it in for. He was quiet for a moment. A customer yesterday, left without paying. Said some things. What kind of things? He told her, briefly and without embellishment, because Mrs. Peters did not require embellishment, and in fact found it mildly irritating. He told her what Victoria Sterling had said, and what she'd said in front of Marcus, and what Marcus had asked him that night. When he finished, Mrs. Peterson was quiet for a moment. What did you tell him? I told him the work deserved to be done right, regardless of whether someone appreciated it. Good, he said. It didn't seem fair. It isn't. She paused. What did you tell him about that? I told him it wasn't. Mrs. Peterson nodded slowly. Good. Don't lie to the boy about how the world works. He needs to know what he's dealing with. She looked at Andre's back, at the steady, unhurried movement of his hands on her car. She'll be back, you know. The woman. The one who left. Andre stopped for just a fraction of a second, then kept working. What makes you say that? Because people who leave owing something always come back, eventually. They either come back to pay it, or they come back because they need something else. And either way, you'll have another chance. Mrs. Peterson shifted in the chair. The question is what you'll do with it. I'll do the same thing I do every time. Fix what needs to be fixed and charge what it's worth. Even if she's not sorry. That's not my department. Mrs. Peterson was quiet for a moment. Then she made a small sound that might have been approval. Andre finished her brake inspection, rotated her tires, and topped off her fluids. He handed her the invoice. She wrote a check without looking at the total, which was something she'd done for years, and which Andre had always understood as a particular form of trust, not blind trust, but the kind that comes from long experience and says, I know what fair looks like from you. And I don't need to verify it every time. Tell Marcus I said hello, Mrs. Peterson said at the door. I will, and Andre. She paused with one hand on the doorframe. Don't keep that $10 in the drawer forever. Either throw it away or frame it. Don't leave it somewhere in between, where it's neither discarded nor honored. That's how things fester. Then she walked out to her car. Andre stood in the doorway and watched her go. The afternoon brought 2 more vehicles, a straightforward oil change, and a more complicated issue with an older Toyota's cooling system that required On to order a part and schedule the owner for a return visit. He made both calls himself, talked both customers through what he'd found, answered their questions without condescension and without rushing. Between jobs, he picked up Daniel Cho's card from the tool bench and turned it in his hands. He set it back down. He picked Marcus up from school at 3:30. Marcus talked the entire 4-block walk back about a science project involving plant growth rates and his plan to use 2 different kinds of soil and whether Dad thought the kind of soil would matter more or the amount of sunlight. Andre said he thought the soil mattered, and here was why. And Marcus argued thoughtfully that sunlight might matter more, and Andre said, well, then you should test both variables properly, and Marcus said that's what the project is, which, fair point. That evening, after dinner, after the dishes, after Marcus's reading time, after the lights out and the 15-minute conversation through the closed bedroom door that had become a ritual, Marcus speaking from inside his room, Andre sitting in the hallway with his back against the wall, talking about whatever Marcus needed to talk about before he could sleep. Andre sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold and Daniel Cho's business card in front of him. He thought about the 17 S9 vehicles currently in service across North America. He thought about people driving those vehicles on highways every day. Not knowing. He thought about the coupling failure that nobody had documented. The leading indicator nobody had connected. The pattern that was sitting inside his head, fully formed, because 15 years of listening to machines had put it there, and which was not, as far as he knew, written down anywhere that Sterling's engineering team could access it. He thought about a woman driving 80 miles an hour on I-94, who didn't know how close she'd come, and he was honest with himself, in the way he tried always to be honest with himself. It wasn't just about the other 17 vehicles. Part of what he was sitting with was also the fact that Daniel Cho had come to him, had stood in his garage and said, in so many words, that the thing Victoria Sterling had dismissed as not worth $650 was worth, apparently, a great deal more than she'd decided. He was honest enough to admit that part of him wanted her to know that. He was also honest enough to know that, wanting her to know, it was not a good enough reason to make a decision that should be made on other grounds. He picked up the card. He thought about the children, Daniel Cho's daughters, who probably didn't know their father had said that this morning in a mechanic's garage on the east side of a town Victoria Sterling probably couldn't have located on a map. He thought about whoever else was driving those vehicles. He thought about how a fire starts inside a sealed relay block and how fast it travels through an electrical harness that runs the length of a car. He set the card down, he drank the cold coffee, he went to bed. He did not call, not yet, not because he was angry or strategic or trying to manufacture a moment of power. He wasn't those things, and he didn't want to perform them. He didn't call yet because he hadn't finished thinking, and Andre did not make calls before he'd finished thinking. It was the same discipline he applied to engines. Don't act on what you haven't verified. Don't replace what you haven't diagnosed. Don't trust the first explanation just because it's the most available one. He needed to be sure he was calling for the right reasons. He needed to be sure that what he was about to do was about the work and the people who needed to be safe, and not about the look he imagined on Victoria Sterling's face when she understood what he knew. He lay in the dark and listened to his apartment. The radiator ticked. A car passed on the street. Somewhere down the hall, a door opened and closed. In the back room, Marcus slept with the profound and total commitment to unconsciousness that only 8-year-olds achieve. One arm thrown over the edge of the bed, one foot outside the covers. Andre stared at the ceiling. The next day passed the same way the days before it had passed: work, school, pickup, dinner, bedtime, quiet. He called 3 customers about scheduled repairs. He ordered parts for 2 jobs. He fixed a radiator hose on a minivan belonging to a young father who couldn't afford to be without the vehicle, and who Andre consequently charged his shop minimum rate, which was something he did periodically and which he did not discuss with anyone, because it wasn't a performance of generosity, it was just a decision. On the second day after Daniel Cho's visit, Andre found himself thinking about the thermal coupling again. Not the one he'd fixed, the others. He went to his workbench, after Marcus was in bed, and opened his notebook, not a digital file, an actual notebook, spiral-bound, the kind that cost $2.19 at the dollar store, which he used for technical documentation and observations, because he trusted his own handwriting more than he trusted his phone to be accessible at the exact moment he needed it. He found his notes from the S9 repair 2 years ago. He found his notes from the S9 repair in his garage 2 days ago. He sat at the bench and wrote for an hour. He wrote out the full diagnostic pathway, the leading indicators, the specific thermal signature, the extraction sequence, the repair procedure, the post-repair monitoring points. He wrote it out, the way Raymond had taught him to write documentation, precisely, completely, as if the person reading it had the mechanical knowledge but not the specific experience. No shortcuts, no assumptions. When he finished, he read it back. It was 8 pages. It was clear, it was complete. He put it in a folder. He picked up Daniel Cho's card. He thought about it for another full day. On the morning of the 5th day, after Victoria Sterling had placed a $10 bill on his counter and told him what his work was worth, Andre picked up his phone. He did not call Daniel Cho. He called his shop phone's voicemail and cleared the messages from the last week, organized the afternoon's schedule, confirmed 2 appointment times, and started his morning the way he always started it, with the work first. Because the work was the foundation, and everything else was built on top of it. He was under a 2016 Nissan Maxima, chasing an intermittent misfire that had defeated 2 other mechanics, when he heard a vehicle pull up in front of his garage. He heard the engine. He went completely still underneath the Nissan, because he recognized it. He had spent 22 minutes with that engine 4 days ago. He had listened to it, the way you listen to something you've repaired. The way a surgeon recognizes the sound of a patient they've operated on. The way a builder recognizes the structure of something they've made. The engine of the Sterling Apex S9 had a particular idle note after the relay block repair. A small harmonic change in the secondary system's cycling pattern that was almost inaudible to anyone who hadn't done the repair, and was completely distinctive to anyone who had. It was her. Andre did not move for a long moment. Then he put down his wrench, wiped his hands, and slid out from under the Nissan. He stood up. He looked at the entrance. Victoria Sterling was standing just inside the garage doorway, not in a blazer and heels this time, but in a long coat that she was gripping closed with both hands, which was a posture Andre recognized as a person holding themselves together through the physical act of containment. Her face was different than it had been 5 days ago. Not softened, not the kind of different that means something has fundamentally shifted but altered. Like something had been removed that she'd been relying on, and hadn't noticed she was relying on, until it was gone. She looked at him. He looked at her. The garage was quiet, except for the Nissan's cooling engine ticking in the bay. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Victoria Sterling opened her mouth and said 3 words that Andre suspected, given the expression on her face, had cost her more than anything she had ever purchased. "I need help." Andre crossed his arms. He did not say anything yet, because there were things he needed to know before this conversation went anywhere, and the first of them was whether those 3 words were the beginning of something real, or whether they were just what came before the she was to offer him. He was about to find out. "I need help." The word sat in the air between them. Andre looked at her. Not through her, not past her, at her, with the direct, unhurried attention of a man who had learned that the first version of what people said was rarely the complete version, and that what came after the silence was usually more honest than what came before it. Victoria Sterling held his gaze for about 3 seconds. Then she looked away, not down, not to the side with embarrassment, but up and slightly left, the way people look when they're recalculating, when the thing they'd planned to say has hit an unexpected surface and they're working out what to do next. "My company," she stopped. "Started again. There is a vehicle. A vehicle that cannot be fixed. My entire engineering team has been working on it for 3 days and they cannot find the problem. And the demonstration is in 48 hours, and if the demonstration fails..." Another stop. She pressed her lips together. "I need someone who can find things that other people miss." Andre did not move. "You know someone like that?" Victoria looked at him. Don't what? Don't make me say it again. You know why I'm here. I know why you're here. What I'm trying to understand is whether you know why you're here." She stared at him. "What does that mean?" "It means there's a difference between coming here because you need a mechanic and coming here because you understand something you didn't understand 5 days ago." He kept his voice completely even. Not cold, not hostile, simply factual in the way that the most important things deserve to be stated factually. "Which one is this?" The question hung there. Victoria's jaw tightened. He could see her working through something, the same negotiation he'd watched happen on her face 5 days ago, when he'd explained what the coupling failure would have meant, the same struggle between what she'd decided to believe about a situation and what the situation was actually showing her. "Both," she finally said. He waited. "I need a mechanic. And she exhaled through her nose, a short, controlled breath. "I understand that I was wrong about what I said, about what I paid." She reached into her coat and pulled out an envelope and placed it on the counter, the same counter where she'd placed the $10 bill, and pushed it toward him. "The remaining balance, and a written apology. It's in there." Andre looked at the envelope. He did not pick it up. "Money fixes invoices," he said. "It doesn't erase disrespect." "I know that. Does the written apology?" A long pause. "It doesn't." She kept her eyes on him. "Nothing erases it." I know that too. He held her gaze for a moment longer. Then he walked to the counter and picked up the envelope. He opened it and looked at the check and the letter, which was on company letterhead and handwritten, not typed, which he noted, and he read it without rushing. It said what she'd said. It said. It acknowledged specifically what had happened and what had been said in front of Marcus. And it used the word wrong without qualification or cushioning. He folded it and put it back in the envelope. What's the vehicle? Something shifted in her posture, not relief exactly, more like the release of a tension she hadn't realized she'd been holding at maximum compression. A 1967 Shelby GT 500, one of 4 surviving originals with full documentation and unbroken provenance. It's the centerpiece of our heritage exhibition. We're unveiling it alongside our new concept line. The idea is to connect where American automotive excellence started with where we believe it's going. 22 institutional investors, 14 private collectors, 6 automotive journalists. She paused. And 3 members of our board who have been questioning my leadership for the last 6 months. What's wrong with it? Nobody knows. It runs. It runs beautifully at idle and at low speed. But when it's pushed past 40 miles an hour, which it needs to be, for the demonstration circuit, it misfires. Not consistently, intermittently, enough that it loses power and surges, and she stopped. It's a $20 million vehicle, in front of 22 investors. Misfiring. Andre set the envelope down. Who's been working on it? My chief engineering team. 3 senior technicians, 2 of whom trained specifically in classic American muscle restoration. And 2 outside consultants we brought in from Detroit. How long? 3 days. What have they found? Everything looks correct. Fuel system, ignition timing, carburetor, compression, all within spec. They replaced the points, the condenser, the spark plugs. They rebuilt the carburetor, still misfires above 40. Andre was quiet for a moment. He was listening to the description the way he always listened. Not for the answer, not yet, but for the shape of the problem. For what the symptoms revealed about where the problem wasn't, which was often more useful than chasing where you thought it was. Does it misfire under load or just at speed? She hesitated. I don't. What's the difference? If it misfires when you push it, regardless of speed when you're accelerating hard, in a lower gear that's load-related. If it only misfires once you're already moving and you're in a higher gear at cruise speed, that's a different set of possibilities. I'd have to ask the technicians. I'll ask them myself. She looked at him. You'll come? I'll come look at the vehicle. That's not a yes to anything else. That's me looking at a car. He picked up a rag from the bench and began wiping his hands. My conditions. Name them. I work alone. I don't want your engineers standing over my shoulder explaining to me what they already checked, because if they'd found it, you wouldn't be here. I need access to the complete service records on the vehicle for the last 10 years, and whatever documentation you have on the work that's been done in the last 3 days. I need someone available to answer questions about the vehicle's history, who actually knows the history, not someone reading from a file. And I need to bring my son. Victoria blinked. Your son. He has school tomorrow. After school he comes with me. I'm not leaving him alone in the afternoon, and I'm not asking someone to watch him so that I can go fix your problem. He looked at her steadily. Those are my conditions. The facility it's a controlled environment. Security protocols. It's not, then we have a problem. She stopped. She looked at him. He could see the calculation happening, the rapid assessment of what she could flex and what she couldn't. What mattered more? The security protocols that were fundamentally about image management, or the 48 hours she had left before 22 investors watched a $20 million car misfire in front of them. Fine, your son can come, and full authority. If I tell your engineers to stand back, they stand back. If I say I need a part, I get it. No committee discussion, no approval chain. I ask for something, it happens. Understood, and my rate. Whatever time I put into this vehicle, whatever I find or don't find, you pay my rate, which is not $10. She didn't flinch. What is your rate? He told her. It was a fair rate, not inflated, not artificially elevated to make a point. His honest rate, the same rate he would have quoted anyone who'd called him for a specialized diagnostic on a classic vehicle. It was also, he was aware, a fraction of what any of the consultants she'd already brought in had charged. Done. And one more thing, she waited. When we're working on the vehicle, we're working on the vehicle. Whatever you think about where I work, or what my garage looks like, or what my hands look like, that is not in the building. You understand me? Victoria Sterling looked at him for a long moment. Her expression was difficult to read, but something in it had shifted further than it had when she'd walked in, something more than negotiation, less than contrition, closer to a kind of recognition, as if she was seeing, for the first time, the specific shape of what she'd actually done 5 days ago. Understood, she said quietly. Andre nodded once. I'll be there at 4:30 tomorrow. Text that number, the address, and any gate codes. He turned back toward the Nissan. Now I have a car I need to finish. She picked up her keys from the counter, where she'd set them when she came in. She walked toward the door. She stopped at the threshold. Mr. Williams. He looked up from where he was crouching at the front of the Nissan. Daniel told me about the other S9 vehicles, about the diagnostic pathway you documented. She paused. He said you wrote it out. 8 pages. I did. Why? He looked at her. Because there are people driving those cars who don't know what's developing under the hood. And because I know what to do about it, and I'm the only one who does. Those are sufficient reasons. She stood in the doorway for a moment. You could have held that over us, used it as leverage. But you didn't. No. Another pause. Why not? Andre stood up fully and looked at her across the garage. Because that's not what the information is for. Victoria Sterling left. Andre crouched back down and went back to the Nissan's misfire. He found it, in 20 minutes, a cracked distributor cap that was invisible from the outside, but had a hairline fracture on the inner contact surface that was causing intermittent spark loss under the vibration of higher RPM operation. He showed the owner when she came to pick it up, walked her through what it had been doing and why, and answered her 3 follow-up questions, with the same patience he brought to every explanation. After she left, he sat at the workbench with a coffee and thought about the Shelby. 1967 GT 500. 4 cylinders, no, 8 cylinders. 428 cubic inch police interceptor engine, original. The GT 500 was not a subtle machine. It was a machine built at the apex of an era when American automotive engineering operated on the principle that the correct response to any engineering challenge was more displacement and more power. It was not refined. It was not economical. It was, in its way, a kind of argument, a physical, mechanical argument that the distance between one place and another could be compressed by sheer committed force. Andre had a deep and uncomplicated affection for cars like that. He had worked on 3 Shelbys in his career, 2 from the early 70s, 1 from 1966. He had never worked on a 67 GT 500 specifically, but he knew the engine, and he knew the platform, and he knew the particular category of problem that afflicted preserved originals that were taken out of controlled storage and asked to perform under real-world conditions after years of being. Maintained to look correct rather than run correctly. Because there was a difference, and it was a difference that institutional collectors and their institutional technicians often underestimated. Because their frame of reference was authenticity, maintaining the vehicle in a state that looked and documented as original rather than performance, which was about making the thing actually do what it was built to do. An original carburetor, rebuilt to look and measure exactly as it had left the factory, was not necessarily a carburetor that would deliver optimal fuel-air mixture at cruise speed in the specific atmospheric conditions of whatever city the demonstration was happening in. Accounting for current fuel formulation, ambient temperature, and altitude. An original point-style ignition system, properly set by spec, was not necessarily providing the exact spark advance that this specific engine needed with these specific plugs and this specific load profile. The problem, he suspected, was not a component failure. The problem was calibration drift, accumulated small misalignments across multiple systems, each of which was individually within spec, but which combined, at speed and under load, to produce an engine that was fighting itself. He suspected. He didn't know. He wouldn't know until he was in front of the vehicle with his hands in it. He picked Marcus up at 3:30 the next afternoon. Marcus was in a good mood, which meant the science project had gone well, which meant Marcus's hypothesis about the soil had been supported by the preliminary data, Which, Marcus reported, with the subdued but visible satisfaction of who had been right about something and was being careful not to be obnoxious about it. Dad, where are we going? I have a job, big one. You're coming with me. Marcus looked at him. Is it the same lady? Andre glanced at him. How did you know it was a lady? Because you said a job in the voice you use went something complicated. And the most complicated thing that happened this week was the lady with the nice car. Andre was quiet for a moment. Yes, it's the same lady. Are you going to fix her car again? Different car. Is she going to pay you this time? Yes, more than $10. Significantly. Marcus absorbed this. He was quiet for a moment, watching the street through the passenger window. Are you going to be okay going there? Andre looked at his son. What do you mean? I mean, Marcus thought carefully about how to say it. Like, she was mean to you, and now you're going to help her. I just want to know if that's going to feel bad. Andre kept his eyes on the road. This was the thing about Marcus. This was the specific thing that undid him sometimes, quietly and without warning, in the middle of ordinary moments. The precision of the boy's attention. The fact that he asked the question, not because he wanted permission to feel something on Andre's behalf, but because he genuinely wanted to know the internal experience of the person he loved most and was trying to understand how a person was supposed to navigate it. I thought about it, Andre said, and I decided that going there is the right thing regardless of how it feels. Because there are other cars, other vehicles, with the same issue cars found in hers, and the information I have could prevent someone from getting hurt. That matters more than whether it feels bad. Marcus thought about this. But does it feel bad? A little, yeah. Okay. Marcus turned back to the window. I just wanted to know the true answer. I know you did. They drove the rest of the way in comfortable quiet. Mark's watching the city change around them as they moved from their neighborhood toward the part of the city where the buildings got newer and the streets got wider and the landscaping got more deliberate. The Sterling facility was not what Andre had expected. He had been picturing a showroom, something glossy and performative, designed to impress visitors. What he pulled up to was a working facility, large and serious, with the functional architecture of a place that was actually used for the things it claimed to be used for. The security at the gate was professional. The gate code Victoria had texted him worked on the first attempt. They were met inside by a young woman named Reyes, who had the controlled energy of someone running on insufficient sleep and too much coffee, and who led them through a main floor working space vehicle in various states of assembly, equipment that showed actual use, people in work clothes who looked at Andre with professional assessment rather than social evaluation. He felt, for the first time, since the conversation in his garage the day before, something that might have been cautious interest. They walked through to a separate building at the rear of the facility, a climate-controlled exhibition space that smelled like controlled air and careful preservation, and the particular quality of mechanical history that lives inside vehicles, old enough to remember being new. The Shelby was in the center of the space. Andre stopped walking. Marcus beside him went completely still, because it was one of those objects, one of those rare physical objects that does something to the air around it, that occupies space differently than the space around it. That makes you aware, without being told, that you are in the presence of something that had been made with total commitment to a single, clear purpose. The 1967 Shelby GT500 sat under controlled lighting in Brittany blue with white Le Mans stripes running the full length of the hood and roof, and it looked exactly like what it was. A machine built at the exact moment when American muscle reached its absolute apex before the insurance companies and the emissions regulations and the fuel crisis collectively ended the era. 428 cubic inches of Ford Police Interceptor V8. Side exit exhaust, original Shelby badging, zero modifications. Completely, documentably, irreversibly original, Marcus whispered Dad. I know, that's a Shelby. 1967 GT500. That's worth a lot. Marcus went quiet. He stood very still and looked at it with an expression that Andre recognized, because it was the expression Marcus made when he was storing something, filing it in the permanent category. The things he would remember, specifically for the rest of his life. Andre let him have that moment. Then he moved forward. 3 men were standing near the far side of the vehicle, and they watched Andre walk toward them with the specific expression of people who have been waiting for something they're not sure they believe in. They were the engineering team, he could tell from the way they stood relative to the car, with the possessive proximity of people who had been working on it for 3 days and had not yet solved it, which made the car feel both like their responsibility and their failure. The one in the center spoke first, senior by posture and the particular quality of his skepticism. "You're Williams. I am Kevin Marsh, Chief of Technical Operations." He did not offer his hand. "Victoria said to give you access. She said to give me full access, including your work logs from the last 3 days." Marsh's expression shifted slightly. "You want to read our work logs? I want to know what you've already eliminated, so I don't spend time repeating work that's already been done." A brief pause. Then Marsh nodded to one of the other men who produced a tablet and handed it to Andre. Andre read through the 3 days of diagnostic documentation while standing next to the Shelby. He read carefully and completely, the way he read everything, not skimming for highlights, but tracking the actual sequence of what they'd tried and what they'd found and what conclusions they'd drawn and what actions they'd taken as a result. He tracked their logic. He assessed their methodology. Their work was thorough. Their methodology was sound. They were competent technicians, operating from a correct framework they had checked. Everything that was documentably checkable, replaced everything that showed any measurable deviation from spec, and verified their work at each stage. And they had missed it, not because they were careless, not because they hadn't worked hard enough, because they had approached the vehicle the way you approach a modern vehicle component by component, system by system, checking each unit against its specification and moving on when it passed. They had treated each system as discrete. They had not treated the engine as a system of systems, as an integrated mechanical conversation where the answer was not in any single component, but in the relationship between multiple components that were each individually within acceptable range but collectively producing an interaction effect. Andre handed the tablet back. He looked at the Shelby. He walked to the driver's side and crouched down and looked at the exhaust manifold. Then he stood and opened the hood and stood over the engine for a long time, not touching anything, just looking. "Can I hear it run?" Marsh came around to the driver's side and started the engine. The GT500 came to life with the sound of something that had been designed before the concept of noise suppression was considered a selling point. It was loud in the way that original American muscle is loud, not aggressively, not performatively, but simply because it was built at a scale and displacement that produced that sound as a natural consequence. The way a large man's footsteps are heavier than a small man's, not by intention, but by simple physical fact. Andre stood over the open hood and listened. He closed his eyes. Not for dramatic fact. There was nobody watching him at this moment who he was performing for, and if there had been, he would have stopped, but because closing his eyes removed the visual information and let him hear more precisely. The way you turn down the radio when you're trying to read a street sign. The idle was clean, smooth, even steady, no hesitation, no roughness. He listened to the harmonic, the deep, layered sound of 8 cylinders firing in sequence, the exhaust note, the valve train, the secondary mechanical conversation of the accessories, the generator, the power steering pump, the water pump. He listened for 2 full minutes. Then he said, "Rev it." Marsh, in the driver's seat, brought the RPMs up gradually. Andre kept listening there, at approximately 2,300 RPM, under the primary exhaust note, a faint, brief roughness in the firing pattern. Not a miss, not yet. A hesitation, a fraction of a second, where one cylinder's contribution to the firing sequence was fractionally late. Again, Marsh did it again. There it was, same cylinder. Same RPM range. Andre opened his eyes, shut it down. He stood up and looked at Marsh. Number 6 cylinder. The ignition event is late by a fraction above 2,300 RPM. Below that, fine. Above that, fine. Because by the time you're above 3,000, you're moving fast enough that the engine is managing the inconsistency within the firing pattern. But right in that middle range, right at cruise speed on a track, that late ignition event is creating a pressure wave in the exhaust that's feeding back the intake manifold on the next cycle. That feedback is disrupting the fuel-air mixture in number 6 and making the miss worse, which creates more feedback. Which makes it worse, it's a self-amplifying loop that only develops once you're holding a consistent speed in that RPM range for more than about 40 seconds. Nobody said anything. Andre looked at Marsh. Your distributor is set correctly for static timing. But the vacuum advance curve on the distributor isn't calibrated for this engine's specific compression ratio, in combination with the current, atmospheric conditions, and the fuel formulation you're using. The advance is coming in slightly late. It's within the factory spec range, because the factory spec range was written for a slightly different fuel octane standard than what's commercially available now. By the book, it's correct. For this engine, running today, it needs 3 degrees more initial advance and a slightly different vacuum advance curve. Marsh stared at him. One of the other technicians, younger, with the look of someone who was doing rapid internal calculation, said quietly, "We didn't check the advance curve. We checked the static timing." "I know," Andre said. "It's a common stop. Static timing is the documented spec. The advance curve is a calibration, not a spec. It depends on variables the factory couldn't account for 60 years ago." Marcus was standing about 10 feet away, near the rear of the vehicle, not touching anything, watching with focused attention. Marsh looked at Andre for a long moment with an expression that was complex, the specific complexity of a skilled professional confronting something another person found that they didn't find, which requires a person to simultaneously acknowledge the finding and process the implications of having missed it. You got that from hearing it idle for 2 minutes. I got a hypothesis from hearing it idle. I'll confirm it when we adjust the timing and run it. Marsh was quiet. Then, what do you need? A timing light, a vacuum gauge, and someone who can drive the vehicle at a consistent 45 miles per hour in a controlled space while I monitor. And I need 30 minutes without anyone suggesting an alternative explanation for what I just described. Marsh looked at him for one more moment. Then he turned to his team. Get the timing light. They worked for 2 hours. Andre adjusted the initial advance in increments of half a degree, running the engine between each adjustment, listening to each change with the same quiet concentration he brought to every diagnostic. He was aware, at the edge of his attention, of the people in the room, Marsh and his team, Reyes hovering near the door, and at some point, Victoria Sterling herself, who came in quietly and stood at the far end of the space and did not speak. He did not look at her while he was working. He did not look at anyone. He was in conversation with the engine. Marcus sat on a stool near the tool cart, doing his homework, occasionally looking up to watch his father work with the expression of a child who has grown up understanding that this is what his father does, and that it is serious, and that it deserves attention. At the 2-hour mark, Andre said, "Run it." The Shelby went out onto the facility's test circuit, a closed track behind the main building, with one of Marsh's technicians driving and Andre standing at this observation point with Marsh beside him. The GT500 came through the first curve at speed, accelerating onto the straight, and ran clean through the entire rev range without a single misfire. The exhaust note was flat and hard, and completely even a sound like a sustained declaration, like something saying, "This is what I was built to do." Marsh said nothing for a moment. The car came around again. Still clean. Son of a Marsh stopped himself. He looked at Andre. He shook his head slowly. "Take it up to 60 and hold it for 90 seconds. The driver did. Clean. Perfectly. Completely. Continuously clean. Andre said nothing. He watched the car and listened and confirmed what he already knew, which was that the engine was now doing exactly what it had been built to do 60 years ago. When the Shelby came back into the building and the engine was shut down, and the silence settled back into the climate-controlled air, the room was quiet for a long moment. Then, one of Marsh's younger technicians began a slow single clap that was immediately and slightly embarrassingly abandoned when nobody joined it, which would have been funny in other circumstances. Marsh turned to Andre. "I owe you an apology. You don't owe me anything. You did your work right. You just didn't have the specific context. I've been working on classic American muscle for 18 years. I know, and the advance curve calibration issue isn't in any service documentation, because nobody wrote it down. I know about it because I worked on a 66 fastback about 6 years ago with a nearly identical symptom profile, and I spent 3 days figuring it out, and then I wrote it down." He paused. "The write-up's in my shop files if you want it." Marsh looked at him. Yeah, he said. I want it. Victoria Sterling had moved from the far end of the room to somewhere closer during the last 30 minutes. Andre hadn't tracked the movement exactly, but she was there now, within speaking distance, and she had been watching the cars run from the same observation point he'd been standing at. He became aware of her presence, the way you become aware of a particular quality of attention, a directness, a weight. He turned. She was looking at him, not at the car, not at the track, at him. He had expected something on her face: relief, professional satisfaction, the executive composure of a CEO whose demonstration was no longer at risk. And those things were there, visible and real, but they were underneath something else. Something that was harder to name and appeared to be costing her something to let him see. It's fixed, Andre said. I know. Her voice was quieter than it had been in his garage the day before. The demonstration will run clean. You want someone monitoring RPMs during the circuit. Don't let the driver hold exactly 2300 for more than 30 seconds, even though it'll be fine. Just a precaution. The fix is solid, but I'd rather you have someone watching. Okay, silence. I told the board I'd brought in outside consultation, she said. I didn't, she stopped. I didn't tell them who. Some of them would have know what some of them would have done with that information. She looked at him directly. I'm not proud of that. No, but you didn't do it for me. You did it for your demonstration. That's true. And it's not the same as doing the right thing. Andre looked at her steadily. No, it's not. Victoria glanced toward Marcus, who was packing up his homework at the stool, with the focused efficiency of a child who knows the work part is over. Your son, she said. He sat there the whole time. He always sits there. He just worked, on his own. For 2 hours, yes. She was quiet for a moment. How old is he? 8. She nodded slowly. He looks like he's thinking about something serious. He usually is. Another silence. It was a different quality of silence than the ones that had come before it in this building and in his garage, less charged, less transactional, as if some pressure had been released, and what remained was something more honest and less defended. Mr. Williams, I want to offer you. I know what you want to offer me. She looked at him. You haven't heard the number. I don't need to hear the number to know I want to tell you something first. She waited. What you said in front of my son. People who work with their hands shouldn't charge like professionals. I want you to understand something about what that sentence does. Not what it did to me. I've been handling sentences like that my entire career. But what it did to Marcus. He kept his voice completely level. Not angry. Not performing injury. Just clear. He's 8 years old and he's building a picture of the world. Every day he's deciding what's true about what a person can be and what a person deserves and what effort is worth. And in that picture, I am the most important data point. What he sees happen to me, what he watches me do with it, that goes into the picture permanently. It doesn't come out. Victoria was looking at him with the kind of stillness that meant she was genuinely listening, not waiting for her turn to respond, but actually taking in what he was saying and letting it register. What you said in front of him put something in that picture. Something I've been working quietly, every day for 8 years, to make sure he never puts in that picture himself. And you put it there in about 15 seconds. She didn't look away. I know. I'm not saying this so you feel worse than you already feel. I'm saying it so you understand what that sentence cost, and why what you owe is not fixed by a number on a check. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. What would fix it? He looked at her. Nothing fixes it. It happened. But you can do things going forward that build something next to it. Something different. Like what? He held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked at Marcus, who had shouldered his backpack and was waiting with the patient composure of a child, who understood that grown-up conversations sometimes took longer than they appeared to need. Start with that apology letter you put in the envelope. Not the written one, a real one, to him. Victoria Sterling looked at Marcus. Marcus looked back at her with his mother's eyes. And, in the temperature-controlled air of the exhibition space, with the GT500 between them and 60 years of American mechanical history, sitting under careful lights, Victoria Sterling crossed the room, crouched down to 8-year-old eye level, and said something to Marcus that Andre could not entirely hear. He heard part of it. He heard, I was unkind to your father, and I was wrong, and I'm sorry you saw that. And he heard Marcus, After a moment of careful consideration, say, okay, thank you for saying that. Not it's fine. Not don't worry about it. Just okay. Thank you for saying that. Andre stood and watched his son accept an apology with more dignity than most adults managed to deliver one. And he felt something in his chest that was not quite pride and not quite grief, but was built from both of them, the particular feeling of watching a person you had everything in to become, in a specific unscripted moment, exactly who you have been trying to raise. He cleared his throat. Let's talk about that number. Victoria stood back up. She looked at him. $500,000, she said. For the repair, for the S9 diagnostic documentation, and for your consulting input on the fleet inspection protocol for all 17 vehicles. Andre was quiet. That number was determined before I knew how long this would take, or how it would go, she said. It stands regardless. He held the number in his head, turned it the way he'd turned Daniel Cho's business card in the light of the kitchen 3 nights ago. $500,000 was not money, he processed easily. It was not a number that existed inside his normal frame of reference, and he was not going to pretend it didn't mean something. It would pay off the garage's equipment loan. It would build the fund for Marcus's education that Andre had been contributing to in small amounts every month for 6 years. It would do things that mattered, but it would not, and he needed to be clear with himself about this. It would not be the thing that determined whether he'd made the right decision by coming here. He'd already made that decision for the right reasons. The money was separate from the reasons. I'll accept the payment for the work, he said. The S9 documentation, I'll share that regardless. That's about safety, not business, and I won't charge for information that might keep people from getting hurt. Victoria started to speak. Let me finish. The consulting arrangement for the fleet inspections, I'll do it. At my standard rate, not at a number inflated by the situation we're standing in right now. Because that's the honest rate, and I don't do work at rates that aren't honest. She looked at him. That will come to significantly less than what I offered. I know. Why? Because I don't need more than what I earned. I need what I earned. Victoria Sterling looked at him for a long moment, and Andre saw something happen that he had not expected and had not planned for, and would not have engineered even if he could have. He saw the CEO look at a mechanic standing in her own building after fixing her own vehicle, setting his own terms at a rate lower than what she'd offered, and he saw her understand something. Not about business, not about vehicles, not about leverage or negotiation. About what it looked like when a person knew what they were worth. All right, she said quietly, and for the first time since she had walked into his garage 5 days ago in the rain, Victoria Sterling sounded like someone who was not, at that particular moment, performing anything at all. The drive home was quiet in the way that follows something significant, not the silence of nothing having happened, but the silence of too much having happened to process immediately, the kind that requires a person to simply sit inside it for a while, before anything can be organized into language. Marcus fell asleep in the passenger seat, 20 minutes from home. He went out the way he always went out when something had taken everything he had, but completely instantly, with his cheek against the window and his backpack still on his lap, and his face carrying the particular smoothness of a child in genuine rest. No processing, no half-sleep, just gone. Andre drove and didn't turn on the radio. He thought about the GT500's engine note when it came through clean on the second circuit run. He thought about Marsh's face in the moment, after the specific expression of a skilled professional confronting someone more skilled, which was not an easy expression for anyone to wear, and which Marsh had worn with more grace than most. He thought about Victoria Sterling crouched down to Marcus's eye level in the exhibition space, saying the words she'd said. He thought about $500,000, not with excitement, not with the cinematic rush that number probably warranted in someone else's interior life. With the careful, methodical attention he brought to any significant variable, turning it over, checking it from multiple angles, making sure he understood what it was and what it wasn't before he decided how to carry it. It was not a vindication. He needed to be clear about that with himself, because the temptation to frame it as one was real and human and understandable, and also exactly the kind of thinking that led people to make the wrong decisions for the right feeling reasons. The money was not the universe confirming that Victoria Sterling had been wrong. The universe had already confirmed that 5 days ago when he fixed her car for $10, and the car ran perfectly and the coupling held, and she drove away on a road that no longer led to a fire she didn't know was coming. The money was just the work, the accumulated value of knowing what he knew and doing what he did. It had always been worth that. The fact that it had taken a specific crisis and a specific deadline and a specific woman's specific desperation to make that value visible to someone with the authority to pay it, that was not the moment the value appeared. That was just the moment it became impossible to ignore. He thought about his mentor, Raymond. Raymond had owned the garage before Andre had bought it from Curtis in 2003 and run it for 11 years before his knees gave out and his wife started talking seriously about Florida, and the conversation Andre had been dreading became necessary. Raymond had sat him down at the workbench, the same workbench, same garage, same folding chairs with 2 coffees, and had looked at Andre with a particular expression of a man who has already decided something and is waiting for the other person to catch up. "You know this place better than I do," Raymond had said. "You've known it better than me for probably 6 years. I just had the keys, Raymond. I'm not fishing. I'm telling you something true." He'd wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "You have a gift that doesn't come from school and doesn't come from a manual and doesn't come from somebody teaching you. It comes from you, from paying attention in a way that most people can't sustain. I've watched you do it for 11 years, and I'm telling you right now, before I hand you these keys, that you need to understand what you actually have. I understand it. No, you know about it. That's different from understanding it. Understanding it means knowing that the people who walk in here and look at this garage and look at you and decide you're not worth their full respect, that's their failure of perception, not yours. The thing you have doesn't change because somebody doesn't see it. You understand me?" Andre had said yes. He wasn't sure on that day that he'd completely meant it. He thought he meant it more now. He pulled into the parking space in front of their building and sat for a moment with the engine in running, not ready to break the stillness. Marcus slept on in the passenger seat, cheek against the window, completely absent from the world. Andre looked at his son. He thought about what Marcus had said in the car the previous afternoon. "Are you going to be okay going there?" Said with the careful, genuine concern of a child checking on someone he loved. Not asking permission, not seeking reassurance, just wanting to know the true answer, which was exactly what Marcus always wanted. In every conversation, about everything, the true answer. He had raised a boy who wanted the true answer. That felt like the most important thing he had ever done. He turned off the engine. "Hey," he touched Marcus's shoulder. "We're home." Marcus surfaced from sleep with the gradual, slightly confused emergence of someone returning from a considerable distance. He blinked, looked at the building, looked at Andre. "Did she pay you?" "She did. More than $10. Significantly. Marcus nodded and unbuckled his seatbelt and got out of the car with his backpack, and the conversation was apparently complete. Andre followed him up the stairs and unlocked the apartment and started dinner, while Marcus changed out of his school clothes and then reappeared in the kitchen in his home clothes and sat at the table to do the remaining homework he hadn't finished at the facility. It was, in every observable way, exactly like every other evening. The ordinary continuation of a life that had not been transformed by what had happened. Because Andre was clear-eyed enough to know that nothing had been transformed. What had happened was that a capability he'd always had been recognized by someone with a platform and significant resources, and that recognition had produced a financial outcome that would matter. But he was the same person at this kitchen table that he'd been at this kitchen table last week. And the work was the same work, and Marcus was the same Marcus. The only thing that was different was that the $10 bill in the filing cabinet had company now. He thought about that while he made pastas. After dinner, after dishes, after Marcus's reading time and the hallway conversation and lights out, Andre sat at the kitchen table and called his sister Denise in Cleveland. Denise was 4 years older than him and had been the steady external voice in his life since their mother passed, the person who asked the questions he needed to be asked and told him things he needed to hear with the specific combination of love and bluntness that only siblings can land correctly. He told her what had happened. All of it in order from the rainy afternoon, and the $10 bill through Daniel Cho's visit, through Victoria Sterling's return, through the GT500 and the timing advance and the way the engine had sounded coming clean through the circuit. Denise was quiet for a moment after he finished. $500,000. For the repair and the consulting work, yes, Andre. I know. No, I need you to hear me say it out loud. $500,000. Denise, I am aware that you are being very composed about this. I am aware that you have decided this is just the work being fairly valued, and you are not going to make it into a bigger thing than it is. I know you. I am choosing to make it into a bigger thing than it is for approximately 90 seconds, on your behalf, because someone needs to. Andre was quiet. You worked on cars in Raymond's garage when you were 17 years old, Denise said. You learned everything you know because you loved it and you paid attention and you showed up. You built that shop back up from basically nothing after Lisa died. You raised that boy alone, and now someone with more money than sense has discovered what the rest of us have known for 30 years. A pause. So for 90 seconds, less maybe 60 seconds at this point, can you just sit with that and not immediately convert it into a lesson about humility? Andre looked at the table. Yeah, he said. Okay. He sat with it. The 60 seconds passed. Okay, he said. Done. Denise laughed, the full, genuine laugh that had been the background sound of his childhood. You're impossible. I've been called worse. What are you going to do with it? Equipment loan first, then Marcus's education fund. Then there's a lift system I've needed to replace for 3 years. That's it? You're going to pay off debt and buy a car lift? It's a good lift system. Andre Williams, what? You're going to do something for yourself. Something that isn't Marcus, isn't the shop, isn't responsible. You are going to do one thing that's just for you. He thought about it. I'll think about it. You'll think about it. Means you're going to do the 3 responsible things, and tell me later you thought about doing something for yourself and decided the lift was more practical. That's possible. I'm putting a timer on this conversation. 6 months. You're going to do one thing for yourself. 6 months. I'm serious. I know you are. They talked for another 30 minutes about Marcus's science project and Denise's kids and their cousin Terrence, who had opened a barbershop in Atlanta that was apparently doing very well, and the conversation settled into the comfortable, wide-ranging rhythm of people who know each other well enough that the topic doesn't especially matter. What matters is the ongoing fact of the connection. After he hung up, he sat at the table for a while longer. He was thinking about something Victoria had said in the exhibition space, after the car ran clean, after the conversation about Marcus, in the last few minutes before he and Marcus had left. She had said something he'd filed away to consider later, and later had arrived. She had said, I want to ask you something, and I need you to know that this is not the offer I'm making because of what happened. This is something I've been thinking about since Daniel brought me the diagnostic documentation you wrote. 8 pages. Clear, complete, transferable. I've worked with engineers who can't document their own processes that well. He had looked at her and waited. I want to offer you a position. Senior Technical Consultant, specializing in diagnostics and restoration. You'd work with our heritage fleet, our engineering team on complex diagnostic cases, and on developing training protocols for our certified technician program. She had paused. Full salary, benefits, your name on the protocols you develop. He had been quiet for a moment. What would I do with my shop? We'd work around it. Part-time initially, structured around your schedule. We have enough flexibility to make it work, if you want it to work. He had looked at her. Why? Because you found in 2 minutes what my team couldn't find in 3 days. Because you wrote documentation that the man running my technical operations said he wanted on file. Because she had stopped and looked at him with the direct, undefended expression that had appeared on her face only in the last hour. Because the world I work in has a serious problem with finding the right people and recognizing them before a crisis forces the issue. And I would like to start doing that differently. He had said he would think about it. He was still thinking about it. He sat at the kitchen table and turned it over. The offer was real, he could tell that much. Victoria Sterling was not a person who made gestures. She made calculations, and the calculation here was genuine. She needed what he had, and she was willing to restructure things to access it. But the question wasn't whether the offer was real. The question was whether it was right. He thought about Raymond handing him the keys, about the conversation at the workbench, 2 coffees, the specific weight of being handed something that another person had built and trusted you with. He thought about Mrs. Peterson, arriving at noon exactly, every time, without calling ahead, because she'd been coming to this garage for longer than Andre had owned it, and she trusted that it would be there. He thought about Dale, whose crew truck had to be back by noon because the landscaping season was already short, without losing half a workday. About the young father with the minivan, about the customers whose names he knew and whose cars he knew and whose lives depended, in the small but real way that a vehicle was part of a life, on having someone they could bring problems to and trust. He thought about Marcus at the stool in the exhibition space doing his homework with his backpack on while his father worked. About the science project. About diagonal banana slices and the dollar store strawberry air freshener and the hallway conversations in the dark. He thought about the garage. About what the garage was and what it had become and what it was capable of becoming, not because of money, but because of what it represented to the people who came through it and the neighborhood it stood in and the young mechanics he'd started, mentoring informally over the last 2 years. Kids who reminded him of himself at 17 in Raymond's Bay, watching everything and asking the right questions. He thought about that for a long time. And then he thought about something else. The next morning, he called Victoria Sterling. She answered on the second ring, which suggested she had been expecting the call. I've thought about the position. And no, a pause. No, I'm not leaving my shop. I'm not going part-time at my shop. That shop is not a stepping stone to something else. It's the thing. It's what I built, and it's where I work. And the people who come to me specifically, not to a company with my name on some documentation. He kept his voice even. Not defensive, just clear. But I want to propose something different. I'm listening. The training protocol you mentioned. Developing it. I'm willing to do that as an independent contract. I'll work with your technician program on the diagnostic curriculum. The stuff that's not in the manuals. The practical knowledge that only comes from real work. I'll do that at my rate, on my schedule, and I retain the right to publish any methodology I develop through my own shop under my own name. That's workable, and I want something else. She waited. There are kids in my neighborhood who have the same thing I have. The attention, the mechanical intuition, the capability. Some of them are working in shops that aren't teaching them anything. Some of them haven't gotten near a shop at all because nobody offered them a door. He paused. I want a formal apprenticeship pipeline. Sterling funds 3 apprenticeship slots per year, kids from working-class backgrounds. No degree requirement, age 16 to 22. They apprentice at my shop for a year. At the end, they have a documented competency record and a pathway into your certified technician program if they want it, or they go wherever they want with what they've learned. The line was quiet for a moment. 3 slots per year. To start. Funded by Sterling, living stipend for the apprentices, equipment costs, my time at the training rate we agree on. Another pause, longer. Why 3? Because that's what I can do well. I'd rather teach 3 people correctly than 8 people inadequately. That's something I can bring to the board. She paused. Andre, he waited. This is a better idea than the one I offered you. I know. A short silence, then, something that might, on Victoria Sterling, have been the beginning of a laugh. You knew when I made the offer, I had a direction. I needed a night to work it out. Most people in your position would have taken the salary. Most people in my position haven't spent 15 years building something they're not willing to walk away from for a better office. She was quiet for a moment. 3 apprentices per year. Starting next year? Starting in 6 months. I need time to set up the structure properly. I won't rush it. 6 months. All right. A pause. I'm going to need you to come in and talk to the board directly about the apprenticeship structure. Some of them are going to ask questions about ROI and program metrics, and I would rather they heard the answers from you. When? 2 weeks from Thursday. I'll be there. One more thing. The demonstration is the day after tomorrow. I'd like you to be there. Andre was quiet. As a guest, she said. Not a consultant, not a vendor, a guest. With your son if he wants to come. He thought about that. He thought about Marcus, watching the GT500 come through the first circuit curve and the expression on his son's face when the exhaust note hit the specific quality of wonder that April Creek proves when something beautiful and powerful does exactly what it was built to do. I'll ask him, Andre said. Fair enough. He hung up. He sat for a moment with the phone in his hand. Then he got up and started breakfast. Because it was 6:49, and Marcus would be up in exactly 6 minutes, and the oats needed to be ready, and the banana needed to be sliced diagonally, and the morning was not going to wait for anyone to finish and it being significant. Marcus came out at 6:55, exactly on schedule. He sat at the table and looked at his breakfast. Dad. Yeah, you were on the phone. I was. Was it the lady? It was. Marcus ate a bite of oats. He was doing the processing thing. Andre could see it. The internal work happening behind those steady eyes. What did she want? I called her, actually. I had a proposal. What kind of proposal? Andre sat down across from him with his coffee and explained it, the training contract, the board presentation, the apprenticeship program. He explained it completely, and honestly, because that was how he talked to Marcus about things.
Function.
Without simplification and without condescension, because Marcus was 8 years old and possessed of a mind that deserved full information. Marcus listened without interrupting. When Andre finished, Marcus took a long, thoughtful drink of his orange juice. So you're going to teach people? Yes, at our shop. At our shop, and the company pays for it. For the apprentices, yes. Their stipend and their materials. And you still work at the shop. Full-time, nothing changes about the shop. Marcus set down his juice glass. That's good, he said. I didn't want you to leave the shop. I know you didn't. It would have been weird if you left. Yes, I mean, Marcus was choosing words carefully. I think you could have done the other job. You're smart enough. I just think you're most yourself at the shop. Andre looked at his son. Most myself, he repeated. Yeah. Like at the shop you're the version of you where you're the most focused and the most happy and the most, like I don't know. The most like you. He shrugged with the slight self-consciousness of a child who has said something true and is now aware that it might be more than he meant to reveal. Anyway, the teaching thing is better. Andre drank his coffee. She also invited us to the demonstration, the day after tomorrow. The Shelby. Marcus went completely still. The GT500. On a demonstration circuit. You'd see it run. Marcus stared at him with the expression, experiencing a conflict between attempting to appear casual and feeling anything but. I mean, Marcus said carefully, I would go, if you wanted to go. I don't have strong feelings about it. You don't have strong feelings. I mean, it would be fine. It would be, yeah, I would go. For sure I would go. Okay. When you say demonstration circuit, closed track, you'd see it at speed. Marcus picked up his spoon and ate a bite of oats with a composure that was doing significant work. Okay, he said. That's fine, yeah. Andre looked at his son across the breakfast table and did not smile, because Marcus was working very hard on dignified composure, and it would have been unkind to undermine it. The 2 days before the demonstration passed in the normal rhythm of work and school and dinners and bedtime conversations. Andre completed 2 scheduled repairs, onboarded a new regular customer who'd been referred by Dale, and spent an evening drafting the outline of the apprenticeship program's first-year curriculum. Not because he needed to have it ready yet, but because the ideas were there and they needed to go somewhere before they got muddled. He also, on the second evening, went to the filing cabinet and took out the $10 bill. He stood at the workbench and looked at it for a moment. Mrs. Peterson's advice had been sitting with him since she'd said it. Don't leave it somewhere in between, where it's neither discarded nor honored. That's how things fester. He thought about what the bill was. What it had been when Victoria Sterling placed it on the counter. What it had been when he'd put it in the drawer. What it was now. It was a data point. One point of information about one person's perception at one moment in time. It did not represent the full truth about his work's value. He had never believed it did, even in the garage that evening. It represented a failure of perception on Victoria Sterling's part, and that failure had been real and consequential, and it had been partially corrected over the following 5 days. And the correction was still incomplete and would probably remain incomplete in the way that real corrections to real failures always remained incomplete because you couldn't return to the moment and undo it. But it was a data point, not a verdict. He walked to the wall next to the pegboard. He found a small nail, an old finish nail that had been there since before he owned the garage, left behind by Curtis, or by some prior resident of the building. Driven into the plaster at an angle that suggested it had been put there for exactly this kind of purpose. He pressed the bill against the wall and hung it from the nail. He stepped back. He looked at it. A $10 bill on a nail in the wall of a mechanic's garage, in a working-class neighborhood, next to a pegboard of organized tools that had been arranged and rearranged thousands of times over 15 years of use. He thought about what Raymond had said. You need to understand what you actually have. He thought about what Mrs. Peterson had said. He thought about Marcus asking if his father's work was really worth $10, and about the look on Marcus's face when the GT500 came through clean. He thought about what it had felt like to stand in Victoria Sterling's exhibition space and know with the particular certainty of someone who has done the work and does not need the applause that he had found what everyone else had missed. He left the bill on the wall, not as a monument to being wronged, not as a trophy of having been right, as a reminder. The kind Raymond would have understood immediately. The kind that said, this is what it looks like when someone fails to see you. Remember it. Not so you can be bitter about it, but so you can recognize it when it happens again, and keep going anyway. The demonstration was on a Saturday. Andre and Marcus drove to the Sterling facility in the morning, following the same gate code from the same text on Andre's phone. They were met not by Reyes this time, but by Victoria Sterling herself, which was not something Andre had expected, and which told him something about how the morning was being managed. She looked different on a Saturday, not dressed differently, still professional, but carrying herself with slightly less executive armor. She greeted Andre with a direct handshake, and greeted Marcus with the careful, genuine attention of someone who was aware they had something to make up and was not going to perform their way through it. Do you want to come up front? She asked Marcus. I can get you to the observation rail when it runs. Marcus looked at Andre. Go ahead, Andre said. Victoria led them through the facility, which was buzzing with the particular controlled energy of an event that was about to happen. The investors and collectors had been arriving. Since 9 Andre could see them, clun funders near the exhibition entrance, dressed in the understated way that genuinely wealthy people are often dressed at automotive events. Because genuinely wealthy people in this world tended to reserve their showmanship for the cars. The journalists were with their cameras near the track entrance. The board members Andre counted 6, based on the age and bearing and the way they stood slightly apart from the other groups. With the proprietary attention of people evaluating an investment were clustered near Victoria's chief of staff, a woman named Helena, who was managing the morning with the focused efficiency of someone conducting an orchestra that didn't entirely know it was being conducted. Kevin Marsh found Andre near the track entrance. Williams. Marsh. They stood side by side for a moment, looking at the track. I sent my team a note, Marsh said, about the advance curve calibration issue. Included your documentation. How'd they take it? 2 of them pushed back. The younger 2 understood it immediately. A pause. The 2 who pushed back came around after I walked them through the symptom profile on the logs from repair session. They came around all the way. Good. I want to ask you something. Go ahead. The S9 documentation, the 8 pages. You wrote that before you knew what was going to happen here. Before you knew she was coming back. I wrote it 2 nights after she left. Why? Andre glanced at him. I already answered that question. Safety. No, I know, but... Marsh was quiet for a moment. I've been in this industry for 18 years. I've watched a lot of people with specialized knowledge decide how to handle that knowledge when they felt they'd been treated poorly. Most of us hold it, at least for a while. Use it as leverage or just sit on it because it feels fair given what happened. He paused. You didn't do that. No, I'm just trying to understand the thinking. Andre was quiet for a moment. He watched 2 of the investors cross the track entrance toward the exhibition space, one of them pointing at something on the circuit with the focused interest of someone who actually understood what they were looking at. I have a son, Andre said. He's 8. He watches everything I do. And I decided a long time ago that the test of what kind of person I am is not what I do when things go right. It's what I do when someone treats me like I'm less than what I am, and I have to decide whether to hold information that could help people because sitting on it would feel fair. Marsh was quiet because if I sit on it, the people in those 17 vehicles are still at risk, and feeling fair and them being safe are not the same thing. And I know which one matters more. He paused, and Marcus is watching. Marsh nodded slowly. He seems like a good kid. He's a better person than I was at his age. Most of our kids are. That's the goal. The demonstration was scheduled for 11 o'clock. At 10:55, the GT500 was brought to the staging area at the head of the circuit. Under Saturday morning, light cleaner and less controlled than the exhibition space's careful illumination it was, if anything, more affecting. Because the exhibition space had presented it as an artifact. Here, at the head of the track, it was a machine about to do what it was built to do. Marcus was at the observation rail with his forearms resting on the top bar, leaning forward, giving the car his complete and total attention. His eyes were tracking every detail: the engine note at idle, the way the body sat on the suspension, the exhaust at the tailpipes. He was, in that moment, his father's son in the most complete possible way. Andre stood behind him, one hand briefly on his shoulder. At 11 o'clock exactly, the GT500 pulled onto the circuit. The first run was controlled, a demonstration of the car's behavior at moderate speed for the investors and collectors who needed to see it move before they needed to see it perform. It was, even at moderate speed, enough to understand why this vehicle had warranted every dollar of its assessed value. The second run was the full demonstration. The GT500 came off the starting straight and into the first curve at a speed that made the air move. The exhaust note at full acceleration was something Andre felt in his chest, for his ears processed it, not loud in the unpleasant sense, but present in the way that very few sounds are present, in the way that sounds, which are both very old and very powerful, tend to be present. Because they reach something that is older than language in the human response to powerful things. Clean every cylinder, every rev range, no misfire, no hesitation, no feedback loop. Just the engine doing exactly what it had been built to do, in exactly the way it had been built to do it, 60 years after the moment it first existed. Marcus made a sound that was not a word. Andre heard it, and looked at his son at the expression on his face, which was the expression of someone who is witnessing something they will remember specifically for the rest of their life, and felt, again, that thing that was not quite pride and not quite grief, but was built from both. Around them, the investors and collectors responded with the controlled but genuine appreciation of who actually knew what they were hearing and seeing. There was no applause. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was the kind of moment that produces quiet, which is a different and often more meaningful response. Victoria Sterling was standing 20 feet away, watching the car come through the back straight. She glanced at Andre. He nodded once. She looked back at the car. After the demonstration, after the investors had moved back into the exhibition space for the formal presentation, after the GT500 had been returned to its position under the careful lights, after the journalists had gotten what they needed, and the board members were speaking to Helena with expressions that had shifted from evaluative to something warmer. After all of that, Marcus found Andre and pulled on his sleeve. "Dad, yeah, I need to tell you something." Marcus looked up at him with the serious, organized expression of someone who has been composing a statement and is ready to deliver it. "I've been thinking about what you said. About doing the work right, even when someone doesn't appreciate it. About doing it for your own appreciation, and not theirs. Yeah, I think I understand it now. Like I understand it different than when you said it." He paused. "When that car came through, the sound of it, that was because you fixed it right. Not because of the demonstration, not because of the investors. The car sounded like that because you did what the car needed, and it didn't matter whether it was going to be in a demonstration or just in somebody's driveway. You fixed it right." Andre looked at his son. "Yeah," he said. "That's exactly right, and that's why it matters." Marcus looked back at the track where the car had run. Because the car doesn't know whether anybody's watching. The car just runs. And whether it runs right depends on whether you did the work right. Not on whether she paid you. He was quiet for a moment. "She didn't deserve it," Marcus said, "the way it ran. She didn't deserve it based on how she treated you. But the car deserved it, and you deserved it. So it was right. Andre stood in the warm October sunlight next to his son and did not say anything for a moment. Then he put his arm around Marcus's shoulders. "You're going to be something. You know that?" Marcus considered this with the gravity it deserved. "I know," he said. "I've been thinking about what, specifically. What's the current frontrunner? Either a mechanical engineer or a scientist who studies how plants grow in different soils. I haven't narrowed it down, both solid options. Yeah, I'm keeping them both open." They stood like that for a while, Andre with his arm around his son's shoulders, Marcus and Sut leaning slightly into the contact in the unconscious way of children with their people, and watched the empty trek where the GT500 had run, and said nothing more about it. Because nothing more needed to be said. The day was clear and the light was good, and somewhere behind them, a $20 million machine sat under controlled illumination, running perfectly, because a man in a small garage with oil-stained hands had listened to what it needed. 6 months passed away. 6 months pass, when a life is full not quickly, not slowly, but with the particular density of time that is actually being used rather than simply moving through. The equipment loan got paid off in November. Andre wrote the check at the kitchen table on a Tuesday evening, while Marcus was doing homework across from him, and the act of writing it was quieter than he had imagined it would be. No ceremony, no particular feeling of arrival. Just a number on a check, and the clean fact of a weight being lifted from the monthly accounting of his life. He put the check in the envelope, sealed it, set it by the door to mail in the morning, and went back to reviewing Marcus's science report. Marcus noticed. Was that the loan? Yes. Marcus looked at the envelope for a moment. Then back at his report. Good, that was all, which was exactly right. The lift system arrived in December, which required 3 days of installation that Andre largely performed himself with help from a young man named Jerome, who had been hanging around the garage since some time with the unmistakable body language of someone who wanted to ask a question and hadn't found the right moment. Jerome was 19, had grown up 4 blocks from the garage, had been working part-time at an oil change franchise on the main road, and had hands that moved around an engine with an instinctive confidence that reminded Andre so specifically of himself at that age that it was almost uncomfortable to watch. On the second day of the lift installation, Jerome finally asked his question. "Is it true you're starting some kind of apprenticeship thing?" Andre kept working. "Where'd you hear that?" Dale told my uncle. Dale said, "You fixed his truck and you were talking about starting a program. Teaching people. Dale talks a lot. Is it true, though?" Andre set down his wrench and looked at Jerome directly. "It's true. 6 months. Starts in the spring. 3 slots the first year." Jerome's expression did something complicated, the particular complexity of someone who wants something and is trying to assess whether wanting it is reasonable before committing to the vulnerability of asking for it. "How do you get in? You come back in March and we have a conversation. You bring whatever work history you have, and I'm going to ask you to show me some things on a vehicle. Not pass a test, show me how you think, how you approach a problem, whether you listen to the machine or just to what you already believe about the machine." Jerome nodded slowly. He was quiet for a moment. What if somebody doesn't have a lot of formal experience? Then they'd better have good instincts and a willingness to work. Formal experience is something I can provide. Instincts are something you either have or you don't, and no program teaches them. Andre picked up his wrench again. "You have good hands, Jerome. I've watched you work. Come back in March." Jerome came back in March. He got one of the 3 slots. The other 2 went to a 20-year-old woman named Priya, whose father had brought her car to Andre twice, and who had, both times, come in with him and stood in the bay asking questions that Andre had found increasingly difficult to answer at the surface level, because they kept requiring deeper explanations, which was exactly the quality he was looking for. And a 17-year-old named Deshawn, who had been referred by a high school auto shop teacher, who told Andre on the phone, simply, "This kid hears things. You'll understand when you meet him." Andre understood when he met him. The program started on a Monday in April, with all 3 of them in the garage at 7:30 in the morning, which was 15 minutes before Andre got back from dropping Marcus at school. He arrived to find all 3 of them already there, which told him something. He stood in front of them and looked at them. "Here are the rules. You ask every question you have. There are no questions that waste my time. The only thing that wastes my time is a question you didn't ask because you were embarrassed. You document what you learn, not for me, for the next person who needs to know it. And you do the work right, or you do it again, not because I'm hard on you, because the work deserves it, and the person whose car this is deserves it. And you deserve to know the difference between doing something correctly and doing something well enough. They listened. Any questions? Jerome raised his hand. Do we get coffee? There's a maker on the table. Filters are in the cabinet. You're responsible for making it when it runs out. Jerome nodded with the gravity of someone accepting a meaningful responsibility. Good, Andre said. Now come look at this Nissan. The spring moved forward. The garage ran the way it had always run the regular customers, the scheduled work, the occasional vehicle that arrived with a problem nobody else had been able to solve, with the addition of 3 young people who were learning to listen to machines, and who were, in the particular way of people who are genuinely suited to the thing they're being taught, progressing faster than Jade had formally planned for, which meant he had to stay ahead of them, which meant he was learning too, which he found he didn't mind at all. Marcus visited the garage every day after school, which was nothing new. But now he visited a garage that contained Jerome and Priya and Deshawn in addition to his father, and he observed them with the same cataloging attention he brought to everything. He asked them questions. He answered their questions when they asked him things, sometimes with information, sometimes with I don't know, but my dad would know. You should ask him, and within 3 weeks had established the kind of easy, matter-of-fact relationship with all 3 children establish when the adults in their environment treat them like people. One afternoon in May, Andre came back from a parts run to find Deshawn, explaining the advanced curve calculation principle, the same principle that had solved the GT500 to Marcus, using a piece of paper and a pencil, drawing the relationship between atmospheric conditions and ignition timing the way Andre had explained it to him. Marcus was listening with complete attention. Andre stood in the doorway and watched. He did not go in immediately. He stood and watched his son receive knowledge from someone who had received it from him. And he thought about Raymond handing him the keys, and about Curtis before Raymond, and about the line of transmission that made knowledge worth having, not because it came from someone credentialed or celebrated, but because it came from someone who had earned it through actual work and passed it forward through actual teaching. He went in. Deshawn looked up. Yeah? That drawing's right. Clean it up and put it in your documentation folder. Deshawn looked at the paper. It's just a sketch. Sketches become diagrams. Diagrams become documentation. Documentation is how it goes from you knowing something to the next person knowing something 10. Start the habit now. Deshawn looked at the paper for another moment. Then he opened his folder. The board presentation happened in May, as well 2 weeks after the program started, which meant Andre walked into the Sterling boardroom, carrying both the work he'd done and the knowledge that the 3 young people were in his garage right now, learning. The boardroom was the kind of room that was designed to establish the seriousness of the institution before a word was said. Long table, high ceiling, the particular quality of controlled air that meant the temperature had been decided by someone who thought about optimal temperatures for business conversations. 8 board members, Helena at the end with her tablet, and Victoria Sterling at the head of the table. Andre sat where they directed him and looked at the 8 people looking at him. He felt briefly the familiar weight of being assessed before being heard. The automatic calculation that happened in certain rooms when a person who looked like him sat down at a table like this. He noted it. He set it aside. He had things to say and he was going to say them. The apprenticeship program is built on one premise, he began. Mechanical intuition is not equally distributed by income bracket or zip code. It is equally distributed by nature. I have met gifted diagnosticians in Ivy League engineering programs, and I have met equally gifted diagnosticians who couldn't afford to finish high school. The difference between them, in almost every case, was not capability. It was access. Access to training, to equipment, to people who recognized what they were seeing and invested in it. He looked around the table. The 3 young people currently working in my garage are going to be exceptional. I knew that within 1 week of working with them. 2 of them had no formal automotive training before April. One of them was asked to leave his previous job because he kept disagreeing with the diagnostic process, which turned out to be because he was correct and his supervisor was not. He paused. My program gives them a year of real work, real documentation, and a real track record. Your company gets first access to the strongest technical candidates you have never been looking in the right places to find. Everybody wins, but the winning requires the investment. One of the board members, older, with the unhurried manner of someone who had been in enough of these conversations to know how they worked, leaned forward slightly. What's your attrition expectation? How many of these apprentices do you expect to stay in the industry long term? I expect all 3 of the current cohort to stay in the industry. I would not have selected them otherwise. I'm not running a program designed to give people an experience. I'm running a program designed to produce working professionals. My standard is whether I would want this person working on my customers' vehicles. If the answer is yes, they complete the program. If the answer is no, I have that conversation early. And the documentation you're developing for our technician training is being built simultaneously. What I teach these apprentices, I document. What I document goes into the curriculum I'm building for your certified program. They're the same work, not parallel tracks. The board member nodded slowly. The meeting lasted an hour and a half. At the end of it, the program was formally approved, and the funding was authorized. Victoria walked Andre to the elevator afterward. They liked you, she said. They liked the program, both. She paused. The one on the end, Harrison, he asked me afterward where you trained. When I told him he taught himself primarily, he was quiet for about 30 seconds, and then said that it figured. What did that mean? I think it meant that people who teach themselves are thorough in a way that football programs don't always produce. Because they can't afford to skip anything. She looked at him. He's going to try to get you to consult on our engineering education program at some point. I'm warning you in advance. How extensive a consulting arrangement? Extensive. I'll hear him out. She nodded. They reached the elevator. Andre. He looked at her. I told the board something at the start of the meeting, before you came in. I told them that the reason we were having this conversation was because I had made a serious mistake in judgment about a person, and that the program we were about to hear about was, in part, my attempt to do something useful with the lesson. She paused. I wanted you to know I said it. He held her gaze for a moment. I appreciate that. It doesn't fix it. No, but it's the right direction. The elevator opened. He stepped in. The apprentices, he said, as the doors began to close. Give them time. Don't rush them into your pipeline. Let the year be a year. Understood. The doors closed. He rode down alone. On a Thursday evening in June, Andre went to his garage after closing and stood in the quiet of the empty space. The new lift was in the center bay, clean and solid. The pegboard was organized the way it always was. The coffee maker was on the folding table. The strawberry air freshener, replaced last month with Marcus's same serious input, turned slightly in the ceiling fan's pull. The $10 bill was on the wall. He looked at it for a long moment. He thought about the night he'd put it there, about what he'd said to himself, standing in the empty garage with the rain on the roof, and Marcus's questions, still sitting in the air. That a person's value does not decrease because someone refuses to recognize it. He still believed that. He believed it more completely now, not because the money had proven it. The money had always inadequate evidence of anything permanent, but because of what had happened in the months since. Because of Jerome, figuring out a cooling system issue on his 3rd week, and looking up back with the exact expression that meant I heard something. Because of Priya, writing documentation that was cleaner and more complete than anything Andre had produced at twice her age. Because of Deshawn, explaining the advance curve to on a piece of paper, passing it forward without ask, because that was simply what you did with something worth knowing. Because of Marcus, at 8 years old and 3/4, telling his father that he was most himself at the shop. He walked to the filing cabinet. He opened the top drawer. The first $10 bill, Victoria's $10 bill, the one from the rainy October afternoon, was on the wall. The filing cabinet drawer was empty except for one other thing, a folded piece of paper. He took it out and opened it. It was Marcus's handwriting. He had found it in the drawer about 3 weeks after the demonstration, placed there without announcement or explanation. in the way Marcus sometimes communicated the things he found difficult to say aloud. It said, "Dad, I know your work is worth more than 10. I've always known. I just wanted to make sure you knew I knew." Andre had read it the first time standing at the open cabinet, and had stood there for a while, and then had put it back and closed the drawer, because some things needed to stay where they were put. He read it again now. Then he folded it carefully and put it back. He closed the drawer. He turned off the shop light. He locked the garage and walked home through the June evening, which was warm and smelled like cut grass from the park 2 blocks over, and the particular summer smell of a city neighborhood that was fully itself, not aspiring to be somewhere else, not apologizing for what it was, just present and real and full of people living their lives. He walked home to make dinner. Marcus was at the kitchen table with his homework when Andre came in, a new science project this time, something involving electrical circuits and conductivity that Marcus had been intensely focused on for a week. He looked up when the door opened. "How was the shop?" "Good." Jerome finished the Camry diagnostic. He got it right. "First try?" "First try." Marcus nodded, with the satisfaction of someone receiving confirmation of something they'd already assessed. "I thought he would. He listens. He does." Andre put water on for pasta and stood at the kitchen window with a glass of water, looking at the street below. The same street lights coming on in the early summer evening. The same bodega on the corner with its lights on. Different too. In the ways that things are different when time has passed through them and left its mark, not transformed, not unrecognizable, but altered in the way that a person is altered by the things they've survived and the choices they've made inside those things. He thought about everything that had happened since a luxury SUV pulled in from the rain and a woman threw a $10 bill on his counter. He thought about what had changed and what hadn't. What hadn't changed: the work, the shop, the strawberry air freshener, the hallway conversations in the dark, the way Marcus asked for the true answer, the way Andre gave it. What had changed? 3 young people were learning to listen to machines in the way that could not be taught from a manual, only from someone who had paid that kind of attention for long enough that it had become a way of seeing the world. That knowledge was moving now from Andre to Jerome and Priya and Deshawn, and from them forward to wherever they went, and from their documentation into a curriculum that would outlast all of them in the training rooms of a company that had needed this knowledge for years without knowing it needed it. All of that from a $10 bill on a rainy October afternoon. Not because the insult had inspired him. He would have done none of this differently, pursued none of this differently, been none of this differently, if Victoria Sterling had paid the $650 and driven away without incident. He had been exactly who he was long before she arrived. But the insult had started a chain of events that made visible what had always been true, the same way that crisis makes visible the structural qualities of a building. The building was already strong or already weak. The crisis simply reveals which. Andre's building had been strong because of Raymond, who had given him the keys, because of Lisa, who had given him Marcus, because of 15 years of work done right, documented correctly, passed forward when it was worth passing. Because of a boy who slept in the next room with his mother's eyes and his father's hands, and a curiosity about the world that had never once been contaminated by the particular risk that comes from being told, early and repeatedly, that your questions are too small for big answers, or your answers are too big for small places. The pasta water started to boil. Andre dropped the pasta in. Marcus appeared at his elbow. "Can I help? Stir this. Don't let it stick." Marcus took the spoon with the seriousness of a child who understood that being given a real task was a form of respect. They made dinner together in the small kitchen of a modest apartment in a working-class neighborhood, and the evening moved the way evenings moved in that home forward, unhurried, full of small conversations and small tasks, and the steady, accumulated warmth of 2 people who knew each other completely and chose each other anyway, every day in every ordinary moment. After dinner, after dishes, Marcus stopped in the hallway on the way to his room and turned around. "Dad, yeah, when Deshawn gets his certification, and Jerome and Priya, will they put your name on it somewhere? Like, will people know it was you who taught them?" Andre looked at his son. "Their names will be on their certifications. Not mine. but you're the reason they know what they know. And Raymond is the reason I know what I know. And the person before Raymond is the reason Raymond knew what he knew. He leaned against the hallway wall. That's how it works. The name that goes on the work is the name of the person who did the work. But the person who did the work carries everyone who taught them. Both things are true. Marcus thought about this with the familiar crease between his brows. So you'll be in there even without your name. That's right. Like how Mom is in me even though he stopped, looked at the floor for a moment, then back up even though. Exactly like that, Andre said quietly. Exactly like that. Marcus nodded once, with the decisive completeness of someone filing something important into permanent storage. Okay, he said. Good night, Dad. Good night, Bud. The bedroom door closed. Andre stood in the hallway. He thought about Lisa, about her eyes in Marcus's face, about her patience in Marcus's manner, about the way she had always said that the most important things a person left behind were not the things they built, but the way they built them. The care they brought, the honesty they insisted on, the belief, maintained against every evidence to the contrary, that work done right mattered regardless of whether the world could see it. She had been right. She had always been right. And Andre Williams stood in the hallway of his apartment with the June evening coming through the window at the end of the hall, and understood not for the first time, but perhaps more completely than ever before, that a man's worth was not determined. In the moment, a powerful person finally recognized it. It was determined every single morning he got up, made breakfast, dropped his son at school, unlocked his garage, and did the work exactly as well as he knew how to do it. Whether anyone was paying attention, whether anyone was paying at all. A man who knows what he is worth does not need the world's permission to be valuable. He simply shows up. He does the work, and the work speaks for itself, long after the insults have been forgotten, long after the checks have cleared, long after the cars have moved on down the road. It speaks in the engine that runs clean when everyone said it couldn't be fixed. It speaks in the young hands that learned to listen, because someone believed they were worth teaching. It speaks in a boy with his mother's eyes who already knows, has always known that his father's work is worth everything. And that is the only accounting that has ever mattered.